So, good morning. Well, that wasn't very good, was it? Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Very good. I was going to say, I hope you've had some strong coffee this morning, but I think I know the answer to that. Because we're going to start the talk this morning with some mathematics. Oh, yes. And in particular with some sequences. So I'm going to put some numbers on the screen, and I'm going to ask you, and just shout out. I mean, this is not formal, so I don't want hands up. Just shout out what you think the next number is in the sequence. It's going to be lots of fun. Oh, yes, it is. Right, okay, first sequence. A nice, easy one to start with. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Very good. And why is number 7 the next number in that? They're all one after. They're all whole numbers. It's a sequence of whole numbers. Very good. Thank you. Lovely. Sequence number 2. Oh, there you go. There's the answer. There's the answer. Sequence number 2. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. Very good. And why is 13 the next number? No, they're not. Or odd numbers. Yes, uneven or odd numbers. Lovely. Very good. Sequence number 3. They're going to start getting a little bit harder now. 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36. 49. Lovely. Couple of... Claire's got the answers. Claire, don't cheat. Why is 49 the next number? They are square numbers, so 1 times 1, 2 times 2, 3 times 3, 4 times 4, 5 times 5, 6 times 6, 49 being 7 times 7. They are square numbers. Well done. Right, sequence 4. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17. This is like doing your 11 plus all over again, isn't it? 19 is the right answer. Matthew's doing very well over here. Why is 19 the right answer? They are prime numbers. Very good. Okay, right, you will be pleased to know the next one is the last one and the hardest of them all. Sequence 5. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34.
Is that your phone number?
It's not my phone number. I want somebody else other than Matthew to answer this. 55 is the right answer. Why is 55 the right answer? Yeah, so it's 0 plus 1 equals 1. So essentially each number is the sum of the previous two numbers, is the better way for me to say that. So the next number, for instance, would be 89. Yes, so 34 plus 55 equals 89. Who can tell me the name of that sequence? Sorry, I heard it down there somewhere. Fibonacci. It is the Fibonacci sequence. Well done, Matthew. He is the quiz guru of Wendover, but there we go. So the Fibonacci sequence, it's named after the Italian mathematician Leonardo Fibonacci, not surprisingly, or Leonardo of Pisa. And he published this sequence in the year 1202, and he was considered to be the most talented Western mathematician of the Middle Ages. The other interesting thing, oh yes it is, with the Fibonacci sequence is that once you go over the number 34, all of those numbers, if you divide one number in that sequence by the preceding one, the number is 1.618. And you can prove it yourself. I did yesterday in a spreadsheet, and I put all the numbers, and then I divided one by the other, and it tends towards, and there's a number just north of 1.618. What's the point? What's the point? Well, that's a good answer. Why don't I come to that? That's a really good question. Because it isn't obvious, is it, what a bit of 13th century Italian mathematics has to do with this morning's worship. The intriguing thing, here's a bit more maths. The intriguing thing about Fibonacci patterns is that you can observe them throughout nature, throughout the universe, particularly but not exclusively in this spiral form that you can see on the slide here. They're kind of a divine template for creation. You could think of it almost as kind of the brand, the underlying brand of God's operating system. And I'll give you some examples. So in chemistry, the arrangement of atoms in certain molecules follows the Fibonacci sequence. In physics, Fibonacci numbers appear in the geometry of crystals and snowflakes. They appear in wave patterns, in resonance frequencies, and even in the structure of subatomic particles. Fibonacci numbers can be observed in the seed arrangements in sunflowers and pine cones. The spiral patterns found in seashells exhibit Fibonacci spirals. The spiral arrangement of petals in flowers, the branching of trees, and the arrangement of leaves all follow the Fibonacci sequence. Those patterns optimize the reception of sunlight, which promotes the vitality and survival of plant life. And in the human body, the proportions between different body parts also tend towards that golden ratio. Each section of your index finger, I'm going to ask you now to look at your index finger and think about it so look at the back of your hand and look at your index finger from the tip down to the base of your wrist. That exhibits the Fibonacci sequence. So each section, each bone within your hand is roughly 1.618 times the previous one. So you've got, the fingernail is 1, 2 is the top part of your finger, 3, 5, and 8. The bones, so your forearm is 1.68, your hand, typically. The bones in your foot also cohere to that Fibonacci sequence. And the proportions within the structure of our DNA also tend towards that golden ratio. Fibonacci patterns even show up in the positioning of our planets and in the spirals within our galaxies. And so once you start to recognize these Fibonacci sequences, you'll begin to see them everywhere. And for many, and certainly for me, their prevalence in nature points to a universe that has been intentionally designed and created. A universe that, of course, is still expanding and evolving and developing over time. But it's doing that to a clear plan, a set of patterns and sequences, a blueprint, an underlying operating system of which Fibonacci is, of course, just one tiny element. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was, I'll start again. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. We live in a universe that sparked into life, as far as we know, about 13.7 billion years ago. It's a universe in which the most distant objects are about 47 billion light years away. And to put that into perspective, a single light year is about 6 trillion miles. So we're talking 47 billion lots of 6 trillion miles. It's a universe which lives and breathes with such breathtaking complexity. A universe of wonderful and intentional design in which we are obviously so tiny, but at the same time so utterly and individually important. I wonder how often any of us stops and simply wonders at the scale and complexity of creation? How often do we find the time to stop from our human busyness, our scurrying about this tiny planet, and to simply gaze in awe at the wonder that is creation? Well, I'm going to show you a video now, and just for a few minutes, let's take that time. So we live within a wonderful creation of intentional design, built to a blueprint that we are only at the very beginning of understanding. A universe full of patterns and sequences that bear the very fingerprints of God. But at the same time, of course, we live on a planet in one small outpost of creation in which we know that all is not as God wills it. At one level, we could perhaps see that as creation gone wrong, a mouldy apple in an otherwise perfect crop, something that creation would perhaps be better off without. But of course, that's not how God works. Although we humans are broken and sinful, although we perpetually disrupt those perfect patterns of creation, we do so as a result of God's ultimate act of love, that gift of free will, that gift of a loving Father who allows us to find the right path. Because our brokenness, our learning, and that process of gradually becoming whole is part of that wonder of creation. That process, I think, is fundamental to our human evolution. It's part of God's deep plan, and it's what John is seeking to communicate to us in that wonderful opening to his gospel that we heard earlier on. It's a curious passage, isn't it? Tom Wright suggests that the opening chapter of John's Gospel is like the driveway to an imposing house. It sets the scene so compellingly for a gospel that is quite unlike the other three, so rich with symbolism and meaning. But despite that symbolism, perhaps because of it, these opening verses can, if we're not careful, go largely unexamined. We can relegate them to a once-a-year outing at our carol service and then pack them away for another year. We can find ourselves marveling at the poetry and the imagery, but then quickly move on up the drive to get a better look at that big old house. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. They're words that are so incredibly familiar to us, and of course to anyone who comes to our Christmas carol services. And we probably know from previous sermons, and perhaps even intuitively, that the Word represents Christ. John is creating parallels between Genesis 1 and the start of his own gospel. He's intentionally reaching back into the Jewish creation story to place Jesus at the very beginning of time, the heart of creation. Jesus is with God and is God. But what about that use of the term, the Word? Well, if we've listened well on Sunday mornings or in Bible study, we might know that the Greek is logos, arguably the most debated and discussed word in the Greek New Testament. It's translated the Word in pretty much every translation of the New Testament. But it's a term with rich meaning and depth that the literal translation really struggles to get to grips with. Because without a capital letter on the front, logos can variously mean message, communication, statement, news, report, saying, utterance, or speech. It's a word that's used with all those commonplace meanings within the New Testament. But with a capital letter, as a descriptor for the Saviour of the world, logos becomes something much deeper and richer. In Jewish theology, we find the idea of logos inextricably entwined with wisdom, expressed so clearly in our reading from Proverbs 8 just a moment ago that Lynn read to us. In language, of course, that closely mirrors that of John 1. The Lord brought me forth as the first of his works before his deeds of old. I was formed long ages ago at the very beginning when the world came to be. So John is identifying to Jewish readers Jesus as the Logos, the embodiment of wisdom which existed with God from the dawning of time, the very first of his works. But at the same time, to pagan readers well versed in Greek philosophy, this idea of the word reflected a principle of rationality lying deep within the whole cosmos and with all human beings. The idea was that if you could get in touch with that principle, your life could find its true meaning. And so we find the word logos, or word, taking on this much richer meaning, something along the lines of logic, wisdom, meaning, purpose, revelation, or blueprint. Jesus is the blueprint for humanity, its meaning, its purpose, its logic. And of course, as John makes so clear in this opening passage of his gospel, the wonderful reality is that the word isn't an abstract principle. It's a person. In other words, as Brian McLaren tells us in We Make the Road by Walking, if we want to know what God is like and what the universe is about, we should pay attention to the logic, meaning, wisdom, and patterns found in the life of Jesus. He communicated the logos, or logic, of God in his teachings. He lived the logos, or pattern, of God in his life. He showed the logos, or essence, of God in the way he treated others. From his birth to his death and beyond, John believes, Jesus translates the logic or meaning or pattern or heart of God into terms we humans can understand: skin and bone, muscle and breath, nerve and action. And so there it is, within this wonderful creation, rich with patterns and sequences, designed so intentionally and so wonderfully, God has provided the clearest possible blueprint for humanity. And we know his name is Jesus. Intuitively, I think we know it's true. We know we are happier, more whole, more deeply human when we follow his way. And we know that that way is the antidote to the rottenness, the imperfection and deep pain that exists within our world. The pain of rivalry, of hatred, of division, of greed, of selfishness, of isolation, of anger, and of violence. That Jesus is the perfect blueprint for humanity is John's simple message at the beginning of this amazing gospel. I'm going to close now by sharing just a short reading with you from a book by Brian McLaren and Northern Irish author Gareth Higgins called The Seventh Story. In it, they weave 7 stories of how humans, they call the people, interact and live with each other. One day, a long time ago, one of the people saw another one of the people holding something shiny. "I want it," said one of the people, so he took it. When he got back home that night, the rest of the people were amazed. "Because I have a shiny object," he proclaimed, "you have to listen to me." He told them a story about what he'd learned about how to be happy, how to have peace and security, how to keep the shiny thing that he had found. The first story, the domination story, said that the way to be happy is to rule over others. But every time that story was attempted, people were unhappy because the rulers oppressed them. So a second story was invented. Let's overthrow the rulers. This revolution story didn't work either because it just turned the tables. putting new people under oppression. Another story began in which the old revolutionaries withdrew into their own isolated spaces and judged the world. In this isolation story, nothing changed. These island communities used the same old stories to run themselves, competing to be in charge and dominating each other. Meanwhile, the domination story and the isolation story had a business merger, which resulted in an experiment. If they could get rid of the people they didn't like, who looked or sounded different, or whose customs weren't like their own, surely that would fix things. Of course, that purification story just led to more suffering. The people still weren't happy, and they knew it. The people tried to convince themselves that things were okay by accumulating things. Toys or nations, it was all the same to them. In this accumulation story, the people kept hurting and hurting each other. A sixth story, the victimization story, was created. The people would make sure that no one would ever forget that they were the victims, that their suffering was their very identity, and that no one had suffered as much as them. Then something new. A poet came to town, a storyteller who knew that the domination story, the revolution story, the isolation story, the purification story, the accumulation story, and the victimization story were all destined to fail. They were destined to fail because they invited every human being who is already interdependent with every other human being, and even with the earth itself, to pretend instead that we are in a competition. The poet had a radical idea, the seed of a seventh story that will heal the world. In the seventh story, the story of reconciliation, we still get to win, just not at anybody else's expense. In the seventh story, human beings are not the protagonists of the world. Love is. Amen.
Now some practical notices for everyone. This afternoon, John Gilby will be leading the church walk, which is leaving from here at 2 p.m. I believe it's a 5.5 mile walk, and I've been told to make sure you wear suitable footwear because it's very muddy. Also, another date is Tuesday the 13th of February. That is Shrove Tuesday, and we are having a pancake party here between 10 and 11:30. You're all warmly invited. There will be lots of crafts to do. There will be some singing and lots of eating of pancakes as well. So please do come and join Sparklers as they enjoy their Shrove Tuesday, and invite any little people that you know as well. I also ask, could you please remember to drop your palm crosses, it's ready for Ash Wednesday, drop them off at either the shop just in the village, leave them here at church, or at the vicarage, please. And yes, Lent is approaching, and we as at St Mary's Church, we are going to be joining the Diocese of Oxford, and use the Come and See materials. William just read those two most important commandments from Mark's Gospel. And those are the commandments we are going to be focusing on for our Come and See Lent. these 2 commandments, I believe, really do give us a rhythm and a shape to our lives. So we will be following Come and See on a Sunday morning, Wednesday evening, and on a Thursday morning. More about that in the weekly email, which will be out this Friday. Also, everyone is invited to our volunteers thank you service. There's so many of you that do an awful lot to enable everything that happens here at St Mary's. And we would like to say a huge thank you. So please do come along on Sunday, the 25th of February at 10 o'clock. And Becky, would you like to share with us the poem that you were inspired to write as Ian was speaking?
It's probably a bit naughty, isn't it? Because I probably should have been listening. I'll watch it again on the live stream. In the beginning was the Word. Yes, you heard. He is the Word. If God is the Word and the creator of it all, does it not make us feel insignificant and small? But yet in all the awesomeness, creation and mess, he saw us and sent his Son to save and bless. A bad apple that was worth him being sent to die, because believe it or not, we are the apple of his eye. Created in the image of God to live in and through his word, to work with him to bless his world. So as we go out on this Sunday, let's let the word live in us and pray that his blessing and love with us will stay. But not stagnant and still, moving and powerful, living and loving in his will. Because friends, the word is flesh. The word is in and through us. So let's bless all with love from heaven above. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Becky. Perhaps you could send those words, if you're happy, to Julie, ready for the email update.
Who breaks the power of sin and darkness, whose love is mighty and so much stronger, the King of glory, the King above all kings, who shakes the whole earth.